So, when you feel like a pizza, you usually have a bunch of choices, right? Ace Attorney is your classic American pepperoni with cheese. It's a stone cold classic, simple, maybe a little spicy, everyone loves it. Zero Escape, on the other hand. We start in medias res. You ask what Danganronpa means to me. I launch into an extended metaphor about different kinds of pizza, wherein I say things like, Umineko no Nakukoroni, why that's like dinner at a nice Italian restaurant. You ask me if I'm feeling okay. Learning to cook a pizza for yourself, why that's almost like reading books that are written for adults. You stop me there, and as my rant sona crumbles into dust, never to be seen again, ask me to summarize the metaphor's intent in 4 syllables without using any descriptors or verbs. The answer? Guilty pleasure. Unsatisfied with that response, you repeat the question about what Danganronpa means to me, but emphasize that you mean it in a more literal sense this time. I pause for about 10 seconds and open up a dictionary. Danganronpa is a series of single-player visual novel adventure games. Danganronpa Trigabyavik started with the simple premise of 15 high school students getting trapped inside a room with a bear, and as soon as people heard that, they said, "Whoa, hold on, stop right there, mate. I loved Grizzly Man. I'm already in." And so it emerged as a smash hit trapped inside a devoted fanbase that only grew more inescapable with each new entry and spin-off. Like the Evil Dead films, Jellyfish albums, and first 3 Metal Gear Solid games, each subsequent Danganronpa builds upon its predecessors, and all 3 have a legion of fans who maintain that it's the best one. The series got popular thanks in part to its stylish combination of visual novel mystery solving, wacky anime high school antics, gruesome murders, complex trials, and minigames that don't really gel with non-Japanese writing systems. The Japanese characters they did bring over? We're ranking them. But before I get to them, you'll have to bear with me as I put things in perspective by recapping the basic premise and structure of the games before we move on to talking about the ensemble cast of characters as a whole and why audiences have grown so attached to them. I'm also going to briefly address some of the criticism the games have received in both areas that I don't think is 100% fair. Now, just to give a couple of quick disclaimers before we get cracking, this video will only be covering the 3 main titles in the Danganronpa series for reasons I'll address later on. We also won't be covering gameplay or doing any real in-depth analysis until the rankings themselves. I just feel it's important people know the perspective I'm approaching stuff from the get-go, because even if I'm not coming in with any red-hot takes, Danganronpa is fundamentally a series about getting into arguments. This is an element of the franchise its fans have vigorously embraced, which is why Danganronpa characters pointing at things is still the 4th most commonly used academic reference format as of this video's publication. The 3 main Danganronpa games each have the same underlying premise and structure. If you're watching this video, then I'm assuming you probably already know most of this, but I figure it's worth breezing through a quick recap just in case there's someone who either hasn't played the games and just wants to steal all of my opinions, or who has played them but has subsequently suffered from a severe case of memory loss, which, as anyone who hasn't would know, may just be more likely than you'd think. Here's how it all plays out. You wake up in high school and quickly run into your fellow Ultimate students. What's an Ultimate? It's this. What's a high school? You already know that. But what you don't know is how you got in and how to get out. Monokuma then shows up and says, "Sorry mate, you gotta play the killing game." The killing game's rules are simple. If you don't want to be trapped in high school for the rest of your life, like in that one nightmare, all you have to do is get away with murdering a fellow student. And that's pretty much it. Hey guys, since the time of recording, I've been made aware that there are actually a number of other more complex rules, and if you break them, you will be executed, so just keep that in mind going forward. Back to the video. After this point, every chapter until the end plays out like this. You hang out with your fellow students, have some chuckles, and try to piece together why you're here and who's behind all this. Monokuma then introduces a new motive compelling everyone to kill, whether via threat, temptation, or something else entirely. Tensions grow high, paranoia seeps in, and before long, your peers commence mangling each other through a series of increasingly Byzantine schemes designed to obfuscate their identities. Once 2 or more people discover a body, everyone has a limited amount of time to investigate the crime, collect clues, go over alibis, and figure out exactly what happened. Not everyone can contribute equally to a murder investigation, whether for emotional reasons, or because play piano good does not equal solve murder yes, and it's always worth keeping in mind that at least one of you will be lying and trying to cover up their tracks in some capacity. The class trials are where it all comes to a head, and comprise the real meat of the game. Everyone argues about who they think did what, why, when, how, before taking a vote. The majority vote picks wrong, the culprit escapes, and you all die. Pick right, and they die. Secrets are exposed, everyone is trying to pin the blame on everyone else, and you have to solve it via completing minigames. The trial goes back and forth, gives us a couple of red herrings, some shocking twists, and the sweet moment where you narrow it down to one person, catch them out in their fibs, make them slip up, and dismantle their arguments. After putting the final pieces in place, you get to sum up the whole case in a cool semi-animated comic sequence, after which the culprit confesses, explains why they did it, and, if you're lucky, says sorry. And then, after that, they get publicly executed in an over-the-top, ironic way that reflects their talents and personality, and you're like, damn, that's fucked up. But it also really makes you think. Everyone debriefs and talks about how messed up whatever just happened was, you get a fun little post-chapter stinger, and move on. So, who's the mastermind controlling Monokuma? Can they escape the school? The mastermind's her, or her again, and they can escape, but it's left ambiguous as to the state of the outside world and what will happen once they do. Personally, I like the ambiguous endings because they give you enough leeway to interpret what's happening outside and where things will go in the way that best satisfies you, which is the kind of thing that keeps you thinking about a story after it finishes and lends itself well to discussion with fellow fans. I mean, I guess you could technically find out by watching or reading some of the spin-off media, but personally, I wouldn't bother because it's mostly dog shit. There are many more similarities between the games than these. See Pigtails concealing a violent criminal past, particularly with regards to murder patterns and pacing. People say this makes them predictable, but I feel like a lot of that can be put down to it being the structure that works best and makes the most sense, given the game's medium, format, and premise. I was originally going to spend another 5 minutes here discussing dramatic narrative structures, as they can be applied to both Danganronpa's individual chapters. Note that chapters 1 through 5 in each game follow your standard Japanese Kisho Tenketsu, as well as games as a whole, but in the end what it kept boiling down to is that when you try and disrupt these structures just to do something different, you risk making the games worse when taken in and of themselves. Here are some other topics I was going to discuss at length, but won't. Anyway, I think a lot of the repeating patterns are due to the fundamental premise of the killing games themselves, and how characters can naturally be expected to respond. For example, why is the double murder always in Chapter 3? Well, while your more observant Anji Onaga type students are going to start analysing the game's rules and patterns from the outset, nobody's going to try and pull off a technical double murder with a cherry on top before the first trial, as it's still an unfamiliar environment. By Chapter 2, you can expect them to maybe get a little bit legalistic with the rules and loopholes, which leaves you with Chapters 3 and 4, and you have to do something different in Chapter 3 to break up the monotony. If you still have over half the class left in Chapter 4, actually, you know what? Fuck it. It's pacing. It's all pacing. In these situations, writers are stuck in a lose-lose scenario regarding fan criticism, where if your plot follows conventional structure and pacing, people will call it predictable, and if it doesn't, then they'll say it's poorly paced. If they figure out the ending beforehand, it's too predictable again, and if they don't, then there either wasn't enough foreshadowing, or it's poor writing because the surprise twist wasn't the surprise twist they were hoping for. It's, you gotta show don't tell level critique from people infested with TV trope's binary brain, trapped in an oaf-like mindset wherein every potential element of an artwork is reduced to either a trope or either a subversion of said trope given its absence. Will I explain this statement further? No! Figure it out for yourself yourself. New Criticism, Literary Theory, and the Iowa Writers' Workshop were CIA psyops designed to constrain the way we... In my opinion, the well-refined killing game formula is actually a major reason Danganronpa's popularity has been so long-lasting. Once you've established the basic killing game recipe, it's easy to pick and choose whatever characters and plot ingredients you want within your imagination for easy, infinite combinations of dramatic murder mystery. It also, and I understand that this is a bit of a naff topic, makes it easy to self-insert and create your own guise. Ask yourself, who would you be? Look, at the end of the day, these games, arguably, aren't rocket science, and nobody's going to complain that a pizza's predictable and not subversive enough because the cheese is on top of the sauce again. Unless it's one of those Chicago-style deep dish pizzas, which I'll admit to finding somewhat of a guilty pleasure on occasion. Throughout Danganronpa, we've met dozens upon dozens of our fellow Ultimate classmates, some of whom we've since come to love, and the majority of whom we've subsequently watched die horrible, horrible deaths. What makes the game special is how underneath the highly stylized character designs, they give many of them multifaceted personalities, interpersonal relationships, and character growth, on top of already being Japan's #1 teenage gambler, snitch, or conservative voter. The rest of them are shallow idiots, antisocial nutjobs, cowards, backstabbers, sociopaths, and one-note joke characters who, personally, I tend to find more likable. Actually, one of the things I really like about the Ultimates, in general, is how, all talents aside, they're still idiot teenagers who constantly make bad, impulsive choices. Because that's what people do, they make bad decisions. A Danganronpa where everyone's acting calm and rational 24/7 would ultimately be a lot more boring. Between all these stabbings and whatnot, you're given ample time to hang out with your students of choice, form a primitive barter system, and learn more about each other. You can discuss your favourite visual novel cliches, the prisoner's dilemma, Schrodinger's cat, game theory, the trolley's problem, arguments about localization, and form friendships that could be long-lasting and possibly even ambiguously romantic, unless they die. The tension of knowing that you might lose more friends with each passing day drives a real sense of urgency in getting as close as you can, for fear that your time together may be cut short. This is another area where a lot of character critique falls flat for me, where people get too caught up on the missed potential of a character who they felt could have been handled differently. The problem with that line of thought is that every character could have hypothetically done an infinite number of things and had an infinite number of different traits, but that would make them a different character, and ultimately, sometimes you have to take things as they are. Personally, I would have liked it if Monokid had been around a lot longer, because a talking bear who loves rock and roll music and says the word hell all the time sounds like the coolest thing ever, but he didn't. And tragically, we never even got to see his rock hard rager. It's kind of another lose-lose scenario for writers, where if you focus on a character before they die, people will say that the death flags were too obvious. If they aren't focused on them, people won't care, and if they do survive, people will say that the writers were unfairly favouring them because they liked some of the guys who died better. That's not to say that a character's automatically better just because they made it all the way to the end. There are characters near and dear to our hearts who didn't even make it to the end of Chapter 1, like Monokid. In some cases, an early death can actually work to a character's advantage audience perception-wise, because if they die in the first few chapters, then that means they don't have a chance to wear thin or give a bad first impression by not getting their best stuff out there until the game's later stages. All I'm saying is that you can't have a tense death game where anyone could die at any given moment, but also you don't have to worry about any of the characters you like getting hurt. If you feel that strongly about it, then I'd encourage you to write your own story or fanfiction or whatever to show everyone that you can do it better and see if that's able to fulfill you. Actually, you should do that thing what I just done said, and then after that file off all the serial numbers, replace a couple of characters with elves, wizards, or representations, and sell it as YA fiction. You wouldn't be the first. As far as I'm concerned, the fact that characters can die without ever reaching the full potential you see in them is a good thing narratively, because that's what happens when people die. I don't want to get too sincere about a game where cartoon teenagers make constant boob jokes, but I've known far too many people who've passed away before anyone ever should, and the thing about death is that once someone dies, they don't get any more character growth. They're gone forever, that's it, and once you kill someone, you can't ever take that back. Death is a premature end to all the good things that ever could have been, and I would highly recommend not dying. Oh, and speaking of boob jokes, there's a bunch of weird horny stuff, which, in all honesty, I don't really care about one way or the other. It comes with the genre, and as I said, they're cartoon teenagers hopped up on rock and roll music, so I'm not sure what else you expected. If you have a problem with this, then I totally get it. You're usually given an option to skip most of the fanservice bits, and I mostly just breeze through it. Unless Mew's there, because Mew's funny, so she gets a free pass. And a sticker for doing a good job. Although most of these characters are pretty good, and I've found nice things to say about almost all of them, I think we can all agree that at the end of the day, some characters are stronger than others. Now, before we dive straight into the rankings and find out who's the GOAT, I'd just like to quickly run over the rules of how this is going to go down, because if nothing else, this series has taught us about the importance of jurisprudential consistency. First off, we're only going to be counting characters from and ranking based off of the mainline Danganronpa games. That means no characters or information from the cartoons, light novels, spin-off games, drama CDs, art books, stage productions, interviews, promotional content, fan projects, manga, or manga. I'm never sure which pronunciation is correct, so I just alternate between the two. Characters will be ranked numerically in ascending order, which means no faffing about with useless categorization methods like tier lists, Myers-Briggs types, or compasses. I've deliberately avoided reading anyone else's character analysis and rankings as much as is reasonably possible before completing this list, so I don't really know what the general vox pop is around some of these guys. My takes are based on my own readings of the games, and while I've thrown a few little theories and speculations in there, I don't think any of them should be super controversial or mind-blowing. If you disagree with the rankings, you are, of course, encouraged to subscribe and yell at me in the comments, Twitter, or LinkedIn, but I doubt you'll be able to change my mind, and like I said, I don't think I'm coming in with more than 1 or 2 hot takes in the first place. If you need those, here are some now. However, on a final note, bribery is legal, and for the right amount of money under the table, I will simperingly recant all but 1 or 2 of the positions I've taken within this list, which I'll render aforementioned in subsequence. Whew, that was a mouthful, and only took 1 take. Izuru. This guy obviously sucks, and I'm not even sure I should be including him here because, as far as we're concerned, he's more of a concept than a character of any interest. He has far less dialogue that's far less interesting than Mother Kuma, who only isn't on this list because I'm not sure as to whether she counts as a separate character to Monokuma or not. She says each Monokuma's thoughts are directly copied from hers, they share a collective consciousness of sorts, and she also says that when she creates a new Monokuma, she gives birth to herself. However, at the same time, she also considers herself to be a distinct individual. Izuru and Hajime are clearly 2 separate characters up until they merge or whatever, but can the same be said for her? This also raises questions as to how and whether an AI can be gendered, something Tenko actually brings up during a discussion with Kiba during V3 Chapter 2. Another 2 characters I would clearly rather talk about than Izuru Kamakura. All Izuru does within the games that we actually get to see is briefly exist, lays around for a couple of minutes, and complain about how everything's dull, even though he is the biggest dullard of them all. That might have been intentional. Who knows? Who gives a shit? As a character, Teru Teru is both unlikable and monotonous. His perversion grows stale after the first time you meet him, and his free time events are mostly bog standard, apart from the one where he tries to give you a roofie. The game attempts to build some extra sympathy for him right before he dies by introducing a sick mother who relies on him, as if possibly over 2/3 of his other classmates don't also have loved ones they want to go back to, pending the status of Nekomaru, Hajime, and Ibuki. On the positive side, I do dig some parts of his design. He looks like a fucked up little gnome, but that's fine. Not all characters have to be conventionally attractive. It still doesn't entirely connect for me, but the idea's there. There's a nice little touch when you look at his uniform and notice he's also got some fake Michelin stars. This subtly tips you off in advance to the fact that he's a fraud, trying to put on airs of sophistication. I don't know if there's like a contrarian Teru Teru's good actually crowd out there, but like, come on. Be real with yourself. Hifumi is a gross, boring weirdo, but nevertheless, he does have quite a number of positive qualities, which I feel obligated to point out in his defense. His design lacks pizzazz, but it's not because he's unattractive. There are more conventionally attractive characters with worse designs. I am a hideous negative 2 out of 10, so far be it from me to judge. He acts smarter than he is, which I think we all do to some degree, but he's far from completely imperceptive, and generally keeps up pace with the rest of the class. I very much like how unswervingly polite he is, even in the face of death. This leads to a very nice little character moment in the second trial, where everyone is freaking out about Genocide Jack, nay Jill, nay Sho, and he's all like, "Yes, hello, pardon me, Miss Serial Killer whom I've just met, may I ask you a question?" Instantly turning her friendly and breaking her out of her shell. That is delightful.
Hello, Mr. Hifumi. You're quite good at turning me on.
Alter Ego actually has more impact on the story than Chihiro proper, in so much as an artificial intelligence can have agency separate from that of its creator and intended design. I think it's interesting how the characters project what they want and desire from Alter Ego onto it, which in turn leads it to absorb that data and change its demeanor and communication method to better suit those desires, in a literal example of code switching. Rantaro is a mildly attractive handsy boy with baggy clothes, jewelry, pea-coloured hair, and your standard cool guy voice. His personality is meant to be mysterious, smart, and insightful, but also friendly and laid back. Now, I know next to nothing about art, writing, or character design, but as I understand it, the way a character looks, sounds, and the impression they give off is meant to deliberately convey something. In Rantaro's case, that something is, hey, I'm a cool and important Danganronpa character. I'm very mysterious. Don't you want to know more about me? And the answer's no, obviously, because they tried way too hard to the point of making it intensely obnoxious. He seems almost entirely committee designed like Poochie the dog from The Simpsons. He is Danganronpa's Poochie. The game kept asking and expecting me to like and be interested in him without giving me any reasons I found compelling to justify it. And if you play through his free time events, Salmon Team, or even the talent development plan, you still don't really get anything to spice him up other than a kind of maudlin backstory that's ridiculous, but not the kind of way that makes it funny. When he unexpectedly died, I was more relieved than anything else, because it could have been someone cool who I was interested in. Like, shit, I was worried about my guy Kaito. The setup was all there for a classic closed room. Like the Monocubs, he's functionally akin to, but less amusing or interesting than. He becomes briefly relevant again at the end of the game, when it's revealed he survived another killing game before immediately fucking this one up. This is interesting, and it kind of works as a delayed punchline, but it doesn't really do anything to change my feelings towards Rantaro himself, and they'd already pulled something vaguely similar with the imposter near the end of Danganronpa 2. Or maybe he just gave me bad vibes and rubbed me the wrong way. Who knows? Good riddance.
I have to go now. My planet needs me.
Monokid is the least of the Monocubs, if only because he is always the first to die and has the least amount of dialogue. His early death, alongside Kaede's, is a shocking reminder that nobody is off limits, and foreshadows the ultimate disposability to the mastermind of the entire cast. See his subsequent eulogy from Monokuma. While we only get to know him for a short amount of time, and it's easy to write him off, he actually has a lot of likable traits that a less discerning player may overlook. Let's compare him to another, presumably more popular character, Ibuki. I don't actually know if Ibuki is more popular than Monokid, of course. I'm just making an assumption, and have avoided any polls to remain as impartial as possible. If I'm wrong about this, then please let me know in the comments. I'm sorry. I wish to apologize. I acknowledge the pain and offense my statements may have caused, and I take full responsibility. I'll be conducting an internal investigation to make sure this doesn't happen again in the future, when I'll try to do better. Once again, I hear you. I'm sorry. Both Ibuki and Monokid have an irreverent hard rock attitude, play guitar, and say cool catchphrases. They each have similar visual design elements, and don't overstay their welcome due to an untimely death. Ibuki's a girl, true, but Monokid is a talking bear of some description, more on that subject later, who pilots a giant robot. So why do we like Ibuki more than Monokid? I call this the Monokid paradox. It's almost as if there isn't a quantitative formula for good writing or creating a likable character. Or is there? Again, we'll touch on that later. I'm sort of dancing around a subject here because we'll address it further in some of the other Monocub analysis, but Monokid plays one other, minor yet important role that often goes overlooked due to the circumstances concurrent with his own death. Monokid is full of blood. That means it's not all Kaede getting smushed all over the piano like a bug. The rabbit does not much amuse me, and I don't find its antics particularly engaging. As someone who, as you've no doubt noticed, struggles with articulation, I do find it funny how she has trouble pronouncing words and names with more than 2 syllables, but endearingly pathetic behaviour can only get you so far. Still, at least she tries, so as my old spelling teacher used to say, she gets an A for effort. Monophony somewhat effectively plays the Tsukomi to Monotaro's Boke in the pair's incestuous Manzai routine. Sorry if I pronounced those words wrong, I'm an Australian and we're a nation of dunces. And she performs the same function, to a lesser degree with the other Monocubs, in a way that kind of mirrors Tsumugi. Don't you think it's interesting that she's able to give birth to a seemingly organic insect monster? And also, as we discussed with Monokid, that she's full of blood. This implies that, at best, Team Danganronpa filled the robots with blood purely for the sake of it, or that the Monocubs are at least somewhat organic. Both ideas which I find highly disturbing, and speak to the dystopian nature of the V3 world and Team Danganronpa's technology. What if the Monocubs aren't so much robots as they are cyborgs, created to live short, painful lives, and to die for our amusement? The Monocubs are born to suffer, and I think that they too deserve empathy. It was tempting to put the imposter exactly one space above regular Byakuya for being more so, but in the end I decided against it because not only would this be doing a disservice to both characters, but also by that metric it would easily catapult Tsumugi to the #1 position. However, this doesn't mean Tsumugi won't take the #1 position. She certainly still has a chance. Keep watching to find out. A lot of the intrigue in Danganronpa 2's first chapter comes from wondering how Byakuya changed so much since we last saw him, but then in the end it turns out it was just someone effectively impersonating him, decoy octopus style, and the real tosspot turns up without acknowledging the pretender who'd been acting better than him in his stead. You do get some small glimpses of the imposter's true self beneath the priggish exterior and food-loving mid-layer, and I do think it's fascinating how they managed to play an idealized version of their target while still retaining all of Byakuya's wank-raw traits, but in the end glimpses are all we must suffice ourselves with. We're only briefly acquainted with Mukuro, during which time she's always pretending to be her sister. She acquits herself well in this window, though coming off as way more pleasant and interesting in many ways than the real thing. Also, I actually think she looks better than Junko. Her big bow creates nice asymmetry, and the pattern tie does a good job of breaking up her outfit. Her sprites also don't careen all over the place wackily like Junko's, which means hers actually let her demonstrate a more consistent attitude and personality. She's got a very lovable cheeky grin, and a very surly, "why I oughta slug you in the face" vibe that I totally dig. It's a shame we never got to see more of her, because she's never any less than charming, even if she is a war criminal. I never cared too much for Chihiro. It's like, oh, look at Chihiro being cute. Oh, Chihiro's dead. Isn't that sad? Oh, diddums. And yes, that is true. Chihiro is cute and it is sad, but also there's not that much more underneath the surface of what we're presented with, which is fine, but I feel there's nothing too substantial. You do Chihiro's free time events and learn that, yes, like we found out in the main story, Chihiro does AI science and wants to get stronger, which is always respectable. You gotta get buff, but that's about it. As you may have noticed, I'm kind of skipping a topic here. Almost every second thing Monosuke says serves to foreshadow the broadcast twist at the end of V3. He is the Danganronpa merchandise, he is the monetization, he is the profit motive, he is the loot box system. The ones that don't serve to do this? Oh, they're just fucking funny. Props to the man. Hajime is moodier and more aggressive than Makoto, and struggles with feelings of inadequacy because he can't remember what his whole deal is. In his case, the lack of prodigal talent or funny gimmicks makes him stand out even more because Danganronpa 2's cast is the most cartoony and over the top of the trilogy. Despite, or rather because of this, he quickly takes a leadership position among the group because being the least Danganronpa person on the island also means you're the most competent by default. The problem is that Hajime isn't so much boring because of his lack of talent as he is because, compared to all the other protagonists, he's just kind of boring. He lacks Makoto's je ne sais quoi, and even by protagonist standards, the good conversations he does have are mostly just the other characters bouncing their best material off of him. He's not bad per se. A mediocre Danganronpa character is still really good by the standards of most other franchises, and I think in general the team has done a ripper job. I just can't bring myself to be as invested or interested in him as I'm clearly meant to be. And just look at him. He's dressed like Dilbert. This boy is going to knock on my door and talk to me about the Church of Latter-day Saints. In conclusion, it turns out inside every boring guy, there's an even more boring guy with Dragon Ball Z hair. Because big hair equals smart, I guess? Mahiru's a character who gives me nothing to really object to. She's very helpful despite her insecurities, and although she has slightly traditional views on gender roles, strongly expecting her male classmates to pick up the slack, that's not really a big deal. So what I'm saying is that she's bland, but in the same way that a Danganronpa protagonist is bland. Kind of like the Proto-Kaide. Fuck, we should have had her instead of fucking Hajime, Jesus. Now, I know nothing about character design, I can't draw for the life of me, and I'm pretty much dog shit at anything to do with art really, but with that in mind, I think Mahiru, more than any other character, looks 100% better in the closing argument cutscenes. For the rest of the game, she looks like a toffee apple on top of a picnic blanket, but when the art style shifts, it's like night and day. Her freckles become a lot more prominent when you can barely see them otherwise, and she has these really expressive, mournful eyes that are almost kind of haunting. And then she gets the old Chapter 2 noggin bonk, and we move on.
Right now.
Monotaro plays arguably the most active role in V3's main story of the Monocubs, aside from possibly Monodam, and like the others, you can draw parallels between him and several of the students in V3. His memory loss is much like that of Gonta, and his untimely death, despite being the nominal Monocub leader and protagonist mirroring Kaide. I don't find him particularly charming compared to the others, but he certainly has his moments, especially in Chapter 4, with becoming adept at programming by forgetting you don't know anything about programming, being a premium example of what I like to call Gilbert and Sullivan logic. The thing about the Monocubs is that they function best as a composite unit, and only truly get to shine during the last trial, where they act as sort of a stage 1 to the final boss that is Samugi. And they excel in this role, providing one of, if not the, single best class trial performances in the franchise, what with their frenetic debate style and having to figure out exactly what they're arguing against, at the same time the player is trying to argue for it. Monotaro's counter-argument strategy of, I remember none of this, it's all new to me, again, mirrors Gonta's. Also, I think the sprite with the little throwing star, that's very cute. Junko being the mastermind is a good twist with some decent foreshadowing building up to it, and her Looney Tunes fourth wall breaking, I don't give a shit about the fucking plot, attitude always spices things up at the beginning of whenever she appears. There are diminishing returns to this, however. The more we see of her, the less mysterious she becomes, her aura gradually wears off, and by the end of Danganronpa 2's final trial, she's really worn out her welcome, and stretched the whole despair shtick cobweb thin, something she acknowledges at the end of V3. It's a testament to her amazing charisma that she was almost able to keep the magic going for that long. I very much appreciate Leon's ethos of doing what he wants and following his own dreams regardless of whether he's ultimate level talented or not. That's interesting. We do not have to be defined by our natural aptitudes, and his refusal to do so speaks well of him. Making him one of the first classmates who you both see and meet is a very deliberate choice, contrasting his current appearance and personality with the clean-cut public image of him you see before you actually enter the school. Anyway, he looks like death metal from No More Heroes. Nekomaru is the character I have had the hardest time placing fairly on this list because in many ways, he effectively doesn't exist to me. It's like flowers. I can look at a flower, I can appreciate that it has a nice shape and a decent hue, but then after a couple of seconds, I have no need to look at it or any others like it again. I can appreciate the beauty of a good tree all day. This weird fungus I found in my yard's pretty cool, and I even own several floral shirts I'm very fond of, but somehow flowers themselves inspire nothing within me. Nekomaru is a very handsome lad with a cool design. He has a bunch of funny lines, and plays an important role in a couple of other characters' arcs, or lack thereof, because this is Danganronpa 2. His backstory has some theoretically fascinating stuff in it, and he even gets hit with a bazooka and turns into a mech. Yet, when I think of him, I feel no inspiration. In fact, I don't feel anything at all. And I can't help but wonder what beauty I'm missing. Sonya confidently declares, "I do not intend to kill anyone, and I do not intend to be killed easily either," and then she just follows through on that, so props to her. Like Sonya, if I were in the killing game, I would simply avoid dying. Her character was very prescient, given the subsequent explosion in the number of women who say Yasasis when listening to podcasts about the Delaware Lady Mangler. She only really takes a prominent role during the latter half of the game, where she takes a lot of the emotional brunt of the surviving cast and starts to pull her weight as someone to argue against during the 4th and 5th trials. She largely coasts for the rest of the game, starting right from the beginning, but honestly she doesn't really have to do that much, and you don't really notice because she has one or two really good lines in that perfect deadpan every hour or so, which just goes to show you the importance of a good first impression. The game builds Celeste up as this unreadable queen manipulator poker face type, where you never know what she's thinking. You spend the first half of the game thinking, okay, Celeste's dangerous, when's she gonna make her big move? I really like her motive being, I do not like being in this school, I would like to leave here, and I saw an opportunity to do so. Extra money? That's always good. That makes sense. Where it all falls apart is that her genius plan consists of getting Curly to kill Mo, killing Curly, and then blaming it on Larry, Mo having let his guard down due to instability caused by the untimely death of Shemp. She then stands around looking suspicious enough that both the people I had play through these games blind to make sure my reactions weren't abnormal instantly figured it out and said, "Celeste, what are you doing?" However, in that trial's favour are the moments where her composure breaks and she starts freaking out on everyone, these being some of the game's voice acting highlights in either dub, particularly in the English version where you get to listen to her fake accent fall apart. I'm also not super fond of her design. I mean, it's fine, and fashion isn't really my wheelhouse, but I feel like the whole 2000s Gothic Lolita Vivienne Westwood thing was already getting played out by the first game's release, and it feels very of its time. Hey guys, forget everything I said in that last bit. I just remembered something really important. I'm a bit strapped for cash right now, so if anyone wants to buy an original Westwood McLaren Seditionary shirt, then I have the one where Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse are fucking. I thought I was going to wear it, I never did. Contact me if you're interested. I'll bump Celeste up a couple of points for reminding me. Kazuichi is one of the more practical students when it comes to actually taking measures to solve the problems they face, which makes sense given his abilities as a mechanic. He's also usually one of the only ones who's an appropriate level of freaked out and focused on not dying instead of inane bullshit. He sometimes reminds me of Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, except much hornier, but you can't really fault Guy for being a bit of a scaredy cat when people are actually dying all around you. His free time events are pretty good, they do a lot to flesh him out, and his design's pretty fucking sick. You can really see that Japanese street fashion influence coming through. He's a cool looking customer. I think of the male Danganronpa characters who are meant to look cool, his is the design that succeeds the most in my books, followed by Leon and maybe Kaito. At this point I could talk about the whole thing with Sonya, but it's not very interesting so I'm not going to. Hey, Dysphonium from the future at the end of the editing process to say Kazuichi's earned some last minute bonus points because I just remembered the part where he says Chiaki has huge jugs and he knows she's standing right there. He's the last character to get one of these, all the other rankings are fixed, I wasn't late to the date, congratulations to him. Back to the video. Mondo doesn't take shit from anybody and he has a really cool design. I personally dig the classic Bosozoku punch perm. There's a reference to the manga JoJo's Bizarre Adventure in him and his brother's names, as well as that of their gang. I can't even begin to explain how surreal it is to me that people know what that is nowadays, because I stopped watching the cartoon halfway through part 3, and mostly remember it from those bad scanlations we used to have to read it with. Let me know if they fixed those. Look, you already understand Mondo. He's afraid to show vulnerability, and because of this eventually succumbs to the other, less important weakness, emotional. I just found out cherries are in season, so I'm going to go down to the store and buy some cherries so I can bake myself a cherry pie. Just imagine I said some sentences with the following words in them. Ibuki's cool, she's never afraid to speak her mind, and it's always a good time with her around. She very much captures the whole mid-2000s random vibe, except much more charming and less obnoxiously than anyone who was doing it for real at the time. Her free time events reveal she has a very strong outlook on following her own path and stuff. Ibuki Miyoda is 5'3", but pretty short. To me, anyway. Guess if you're 5'3", that'll be the normal height. Is that good enough? Look, I completely forgot what I was going to say here. Come on, it's fucking Ibuki. And I really like Ibuki. She cheers me up. Whenever she says something, I'm like, yeah, great job, Ibuki. Keep doing what you're doing in the corner over there. Thumbs up. I'm just recording this out of order. I'm just really fucking tired right now. Maybe I have like Graves' disease or something. I don't know. Pitchfork.com, 8.3 out of 10. Gonta, while naive and somewhat inarticulate compared to his other classmates, is far from unintelligent and contributes just as much as everyone else, if not more than several others. It's easy for an inattentive player to mistake his lack of verbosity for simplicity, the misdirection it provides to both them and his fellow classmates, only furthering the cruelty of the knife twist at the end of Chapter 4. I like how his backstory incorporates elements from both Chrono Trigger and Street Fighter, raising the possibility of several composite timelines. Joshu and one of his monks beheld Akane Owari from Super Danganronpa 2 while walking up the mountain. The monk said, Akane Owari is a violent, scantily clad numbskull who eventually, no matter what, overcomes all challenges that could risk making her grow as a human being or learning much of anything. Joshu responded, yeah, that's why she's so fucking cool, dickhead. You don't need to change as a person if you're already perfect, and oh yeah, she has the Buddha nature. How's that for a subversion of expectations, huh? You'd best learn from her example if you want to become a bodhisattva by the end of the Tang dynasty. Akane, thanks to her ludicrously rough upbringing, is afraid to show vulnerability and lives almost purely on her gut instinct and animal senses. This is something I completely respect, along with her passion for the act of devouring and enthusiasm for beating up Nagito. One of the funniest moments in Danganronpa 2 is in Chapter 4, when, after Akane's been through a lot, Fuyuhiko checks in on her and gives a really heartfelt speech about responsibility, guilt and so forth, which Akane just doesn't fucking get. Like, it goes completely over her head. It is hilarious. Yeah, Akane rules. With Taka, it's easy to solely focus on his relationship with Mondo, which is very good, but to me the most interesting things about him come from the fact that he isn't a genius or naturally talented in anything, just insanely dedicated to being strict and working hard. In theory, any one of us could be Kiyotaka Ishimaru if they had the drive and were willing to make the necessary sacrifices, as unhealthy as that may be. Taka despises the idea that only geniuses matter and our aptitudes have to define our place in the world, and it's interesting that his desire to prove this idea false got him into Hope's Peak, a school whose very idea seemingly represents everything he loathes about the way society is set up. Consider all of this with regards to the real Japanese education system. Perhaps there's some commentary going on there. Contrast Taka with his fellow classmate, Leon, who's naturally gifted in baseball, but also doesn't want to be defined or constricted by it. You can also contrast this with the beliefs Nagito espouses at the end of Danganronpa 1's first chapter, where he says he considers talent and skill to be something inherent instead of earned because Nagito is a bastard man. At first I was worried about why Tenko hated men so much, and was concerned about the direction V3 would take her backstory in, which in retrospect was kind of silly of me, given the Danganronpa series' entirely tasteful history regarding iffy subjects, as demonstrated in games such as Ultra Despair Girls. But then I did her free time events, and it became a whole lot sadder, but in a different way than I was expecting. There's no traumatic incident there, thank God. She's basically just a big rowdy 10-year-old who thinks boys are gross, believes whatever she's told because she's really gullible, and needs Vivants. That explains everything and also makes it a whole lot sadder because a death game is a really, really bad place for her to be. Tenko's actually really sweet, never anything but kind to Shuichi when he goes through hard times. She hates males more as an abstract concept than a thing she actually applies to the people she hangs out with, and actually gets along with everyone pretty well, all things things considered. A very good joke that kind of underlies her entire character is that even though she's nominally an Aikido practitioner, Neo-Aikido actually bears very little resemblance to the traditional martial art on both a temperamental level, demonstrated by Tenko being loud, hyperactive and violent, and a practical one, demonstrated by its use of weapons and effective moves. There are a lot of obvious comparisons to Angie I'm sure many other people have covered, logic versus emotions, faith and so forth, but a really direct one I only realized recently is that while Angie has the ability to project her own emotions and inner peace onto other people via gentle hugs, Tenko has the ability to perfectly understand other people's emotions by doing spine busters, arm drags, and anti-hook style axe kicks. My guess? They're feeling very sore because they just got beat up by Tenko. We don't get a lot from Ryoma, but what we do get is pretty good. His design's awesome, I really dig the jacket, and it's nice to see the oddly shaped classmate get to look cool for once. It's also very interesting to have a character who seems to genuinely not care about his own survival due to already having lost everything, which culminates in the tragic reveal of his motive video. The part where he volunteers to sacrifice himself so everyone else can escape the time limit motive and the Blackened can call for help in the outside world genuinely threw me for a loop. And I was like, oh shit, they actually went there. That's awesome. Ryoma's fucking real. But then Rantaro kinda cocked that up. Just because I don't spend more than a paragraph on a guy doesn't mean I don't appreciate him. It's just that most of these write-ups are cut down to a Ryoma-sized portion of their original length. Whole dead sister incest backstory out of nowhere kind of dampened things, but apart from that, I still like Kyo. His design is very over the top in a way I dig, and it meshes well with his openly ghoulish vibe. There's a very nice little moment in the first investigation where he effectively tells Kaede, I realize that I'm an obvious serial killer, so here's my alibi for what I was doing at the time. I realize that it's natural to suspect me, what with my killings and whatnot, so I don't blame you, and I hope we can work together. A level of self-awareness I find very refreshing, given that this guy is incredibly fucking suspicious, especially in chapter 3, even before he starts hosting a wacky murder seance. The fact that he obviously killed at least one of the victims makes you double guess yourself, refreshes the formula, and changes the dynamic from whodunit to I know you fucking done it, you smug bastard, while he picks apart everyone else's arguments, using the solid logical defense he's pre-planned. Also, fuck me, that murder on Tenko was brutal. Ugh. Oh, I don't like that. Poor Tenko. Toko is an unpleasant, creepy, antisocial nerd with bad hygiene and a repellent stench. My youth language consultant has informed me that she's a pick-me girl, and that's great, because we don't usually get female characters with all of those repulsive traits combined, let alone one as sympathetic as her. We stan an incel queen. One of my favourite little Toko momos is when the subject of Norse mythology comes up during the 5th trial, and you see her suddenly able to speak confidently without stuttering, because that's her whole thing. It's just not usually relevant to solving murders. Kibo sucks. He sucks so fucking much. It's awesome. His Japanese voice does a really good job at making him sound really whiny and annoying, in a way I don't think the English dub quite matches. I think it's funny how he's the ultimate robot, but up until the end of the game when he overcomes his internalized robophobia, shout out to whoever on the localization team came up with that one by the way, he's surrounded by what are, aforementioned cyborg theory aside, way better robots than him. The Chad Toko's virgin, when Toko sneezes and turns into our favourite mass murdering friend, it's the Danganronpa equivalent of when Kramer walks into Seinfeld's apartment. Or possibly when the Squidward walks into the crab restaurant and, look, I've never watched SpongeBob. I'm just trying to switch up my references in the off chance that a child or a teenager watches this, which probably isn't very likely because this is a 10-year-old game series written for adults. The point where they go all in on Toko having a serial killer split personality in chapter 2 is to me the precise moment where the series shows how over the top and ambitious it's prepared to be. And then we meet this serial killer, and they're outgoing and self-confident to the degree that it becomes obnoxious in the same way that Toko is negative and gloomy, which is delightful, and also does a lot to spice up the cast as it's constantly shrinking. I wouldn't describe myself as a huge Kurumi fan, but she has a lot going for her. For one thing, that design is pretty fucking swish, and I dig the swoopy hair. I was talking with a friend of mine about the V3 characters, and she said, "Oh yeah, your personality reminds me of hers." And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm Kurumi now, but also you said the same thing about Peko and Himiko, so I don't entirely understand where you're coming from. Also, I don't think she got past chapter 2 because she got distracted by the Yakuza games, which in all fairness are better than Danganronpa. I forget where I was going with that story. One of my favourite things about Kurumi is how in both sets of her free time events, there's a moment when she says, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Kaede, Shuichi, I'd just like to make it clear right from the get-go that I don't like being called motherly. I am the same age as you. That's the thing I least appreciate in the world, and if you do that, you'd basically be spitting in my face." That's basically the most unbridled emotion she shows until the Chapter 2 trial, which is where she really comes into her own and puts on an absolute clinic of a performance. She's competent enough at leading everyone else around by the nose that if Shuichi wasn't there, they'd probably be completely fucked. And speaking of Shuichi, the moment when she suddenly gets all cloying and pulls the Kaede card on him, that is such a bitch move. It's completely manipulative. I love it. She is stone cold. Also, killing Ryoma to save a much larger and more important group of people who you already had a pre-existing duty of care towards, instead of a group of annoying assholes who you just met, is pretty understandable and arguably the correct thing to do from a moral perspective, given the information she had at hand. And this bit is just fucking intense. She just doesn't give up. That's awesome. I might actually bump her up a spot. From launching a coup to depose Monokuma, to repeatedly coming in clutch during the final trial, Monodam struggles not to steal every single scene he's part of. I think, more than any other entry, this one's just self-explanatory. I mean, just look at the cute little guy. He just wants us all to be friends and get along. I'd like to think that I'd be his friend.
Alright, what are some of your likes?
Ghouls.
Why, hello, Bear.
Son of a bitch. What are you talking about now?
Funny little green ghouls.
We are all friends.
What? Like in movies and cartoons? What?
Little green ghouls, buddy.
Don't write ghouls.
I'm not. I'm putting.
Smugi's great and easily a better mastermind than Junko, even though she also is Junko. For most of the game, she takes a back seat and plays the oft-thankless role of a reactive straight-man observer for the rest of the cast to bounce off, particularly within the class trials. Of these, I think she does one of the best jobs, and every now and again she'll throw in some fun little cartoon, video game, or manga references, or just say something really weird to throw you for a loop and remind you that, no, she's not exactly normal either, despite constantly talking about how plain she is. Then comes the reveal that she's the mastermind, and when you go back and read through all her dialogue, it turns out she's basically been winking at the camera the entire time. Even though she's only been a side character up until this point, the fact that she's been there interacting with you face to face all along makes the reveal hit that much harder. And what a terrifying mastermind she is. You can tell she really wants those emotional reaction video money shots, as she repeatedly rubs in your face exactly how fucked you are. This goes for both her fellow classmates and the player, as she mockingly sock puppets your favourite characters from past installments. "Oh, do you like Chiaki? Do you think Chiaki's cute? Is Chiaki your waifu?" Ha 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 ha. "I'm gonna make Chiaki say this."
I think everyone will feel a lot better after they vote for Kibo.
Ha ha ha, fuck you, buy Chiaki merchandise and DLC. Smugi is both the Danganronpa mega fan, obsessed with endlessly living out the series' past glory days, instead of breaking through that stagnation to look towards new frontiers and ideas. Note that as soon as her plans get disrailed, she panics and doubles down on the boring Hope Speak Academy canon and lore, as well as the studio executive churning through human lives to sate the audience's demand for ever more content creation. But like the Monokubs, I feel it's important to retain some empathy for Smugi, even if she did probably love the MCU. You can see snippets of a real girl who loves cosplay underneath the cosplay of a fake girl who loves cosplay, and in the end, we can't even be sure as to how much she's really involved with Team Danganronpa, considering the ending, and the fact that she was also there when we got kidnapped. She could just as easily be another victim, but I guess we'll never know, as those teenagers effectively died as soon as those flashback lights got turned on. Wow, look at that. We've already passed the halfway mark. Time flies, doesn't it? The problem here is that time's actually flown a little bit too fast. You see, I've been told people like long videos, and in my effort to cut everything down to a reasonable size, I might have actually gone too far. But luckily, I already have a perfect solution. You see, a while back I figured out this one cool trick they don't want you to know, which you can use to enlarge the size of your video for free while still maintaining a high degree of quality. It's called public domain footage. What's public domain footage, you ask? It's this.
I'm Sinbad the sailor, so hardy and hale. I live on an island on the back of a whale. It's a whale of an island, that's not a bad joke. Its lord and its master is this handsome bloke. Oh, the most remarkable, extraordinary fellow. Sinbad the sailor. I scare all creation on land or on sea. But talk about women, they all fall for me. I take my adventures wherever found. I don't want to brag, folks, but I've been around. Who's the most phenomenal, extra special kind of fellow? Sinbad the sailor. From the Valley of Serpents, these diamonds I took. I clean out those serpents with one dirty look. Serpents. Look at this monster so strong and so huge. He'd frighten King Kong, but he's only my stooge. The capture of Bula for me was just fun. Whoever said two heads were better than one? Ha ha! Who's the most phenomenal, extraordinary fellow?
Use Sinlaus the sailor.
On one of my travels, I ran into this. Now there was a thrill I'd be sorry to miss. He spread out his wings and the sunlight grew dim. He took me in his feet, but I ran off with him. Who's the most remarkable, extraordinary fellow? Sinbad the sailor. Who's the most phenomenal, extra special kind of fellow? Sinbad the sailor. I'm afraid of nobody under the sun. All I say is, boom, my enemies run. Who's the most remarkable, extraordinary fellow?
It's Popeye the Sailor Man. Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm strong to the finish, 'cause I eat me spinach. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm one tough gazooka, which hates all palookas, but ain't on the up and square. I biffs and I bops them and always outroughs them, but none of them gets nowhere. If anyone dashes to risk me fist, it's pop and it's wham, understand? So keep good behavior, that's your one lifesaver with Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm strong to the finish, 'cause I eat me spinach. I'm Popeye the Sway Whaler Man.
Who fouls the air with notes so sour and dares to challenge Sinbad? Why, I'll fix him. Wreck that ship. But bring me the woman. Go.
Oh, that was a nice ship we had once. Hey, did you see the same thing I saw? I'm gonna take another look at that thing, see what that was. That's the biggest buzzard I ever saw. Where the fella go?
Oh, where am I?
What is this?
Hey, keep away from me, you! Stop that! Let me alone! Ah, don't do that! I'll punch your face right!
Come here!
I won't!
Get up, sugar, and give us a little smack.
I'll give you a smack all right there!
Hey, we gotta save olive oil. Come on, Wimpy, hurry up before it's too late. Into the brink. Skeet and scat and skittle what and drum the beam the bum skeet scat skittle what and do does the line everybody up. What's this? The Isle of Sinbad, enter not, or whosoever passeth out, Sinbad. What are you trying to be funny?
Oh, luncheon.
Well, here I go within it. Ooh, I don't like this place at all. Sorry I ever came in here. It's kind of spooky to me around here. What's this? Oh, yeah. Oh, trying to scare me like that, huh? Can you imagine that dumb mama nose trying to scare me like that, huh? Oh, can you do that? Oh.
Save me!
Oh, I'm coming, Olive. I just got a little wall here. Oh. Do I hear footprints above it? Oh.
I wanna stop! I wanna stop this dancing!
Stop!
Huh?
Yeah,
Come
Popeye!
on.
Oh,
Who invited you?
I did. What are you gonna do about it, huh? How did you get in here?
Oh, fouled again. I must resort to my last hamburger. Oh. Oh. Huh?
Hey, I wants me Goyle.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Who are you?
I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. Who are you?
Who am I?
You heard what I
Who
said.
am I?
That's what I said.
Why? Who's the most remarkable, extraordinary fellow?
Yo!
Nice little picture, don't you?
phenomenal, extra special kind of fellow. I'm all made up, nobody under the sun. All I say is, boo when my enemies run. Who's the most remarkable, extraordinary fellow? Who?
Popeye the Sailor.
What?
You better fix your shirt there, young fella. Hey,
Well, let's see how great you are.
Hey, let me down, you big... Oh, what's this? Hey, let me down, you big overgrown canary. What's the bigger? What are you doing? Take me for a ride or something? Hey! Oh!
Popeye! Popeye! Come back to me!
There you are with gravy. The old goose has cooked this guy. Hey, hey, don't you think we better talk this thing over?
Try and get out of this one.
Oh, my head, foot.
Comfort to sleep, my baby kid, my peaches and cream, my baby kid. If you don't sleep, my baby kid, I close for you your two eyes like this. Yeah.
Oh, 2 against 1, huh? How do you like that?
What for you like that Popeye smack our face? How do you like about that? You hold that Popeye in this hand. By carbonate, if I had that mug in this hand, I make from him special dish of chopped fricassees. I don't like chopped Popeye fricassees. I make for you to like it.
Oh, why you two-headed that face for I'll fix you. How do you like that? Come on, you're gonna take a double header this time. Wham! Well, I guess I fixed those two fellas. I won't hear from them anymore. Oh, yeah? Oh. Who's gonna make who like chicken fricassee, huh?
There's only room for one great sailor in this world. And that's me.
Oh, says you. We're gonna come to terms right now. Oh, yeah? What do you mean, your island? Is that so? That's too bad, huh? Hey, what are you doing? Hey, you can push me just so far. That's all I gotta say now. Oh. Beat for beat, kiddo. That's what I gotta say. Take that. Hey. Oh. Oh. Peekaboo. I sock you.
Come on,
Oh.
Work.
Oh. Oh. Hey. Oh.
How do you like that?
Oh, this is do you give up? What are you, a fresh guy or something? I'll show you. I can see. Up. Don't leave me now. Oh. take. That's what you are. You're gone places, young fellow. Who's the most remarkable, extraordinary fella?
Yay! It's Hina! Hina's the only character in the game who's nice enough to get, wait for it, 2 stickers! She even makes a friend in Chapter 1, which is better than most of the other jerks can say. She's very peppy and, despite her short attention span, usually ends up being one of the more helpful and active contributors once something goes wrong. Chapter 4 contains most of Hina's big moments, and I think it's interesting how she, most empathetic of the remaining students, and in some ways the emotional core of the group, is broken down by everyone else's distrust of her best friend, Sakura, rather than her own. She feels backed into a corner, and her rash, grief-filled actions in trying to take everyone down with her once Sakura dies are understandable, if not condonable. Even she can't...
Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen, I had something caught in my throat. In conclusion, Hina is fun to have around, and she also slaps Byakuya in the face, which is immensely satisfying. Aw, look at this little cutie pie. Aw. Aw. Ah. Ah. Aw. Aw. Oh. Ah. Aw. Oh. Ah. Mikan has some issues, and it's a little bit uncomfortable at times, especially when you dig into her free time events, but that's deliberate. Sometimes people get a little messed up, and I think there should be a level of uncomfortableness there. The fact that she describes being on Dickhead Murder Island as being heaven-like compared to whatever circumstances she was living under before is very, She means well most of the time, and considering all this, it's heartwarming to see her make some genuine acquaintances. The question as to whether she's consciously exaggerating her vulnerability for pity purposes is answered fairly conclusively in the third trial, because when she does deliberately try and play up her helpless clumsiness, you can instantly tell. This is kind of the opposite of how Hyoko's "I'm just a helpless little kid" routine is nearly indistinguishable from how she acts when she's expressing genuine distress. Between the two of them, there's a lot of learned behaviour, and you can draw a lot of parallels between the two even outside of their unhealthy relationship, where they mutually feed into each other's issues. Her murder plan itself is fairly decent, and the ability to falsify her own autopsies gives her a very simple but effective advantage. The part after you catch her out and she subsequently turns all spooky and erratic, then provides us with what might be the single best non-stop debate segment in the entire series. Both her voice actresses do an astounding job here, as she alternates between sobbing, pleading for forgiveness, and trying to calmly rebut your accusations with a slowly building rage. On the other hand, a disease that makes Mikan evil is the worst motive in the entire series, and the point at which the whole game starts to go downhill fast. And that execution? Yeesh. But on the other hand... Aww. Aww. Yeah. Chiaki's cute, kind, quirky, always needs a little time to think about what she's going to say next, and can be a little socially naive. Like Louis Vuitton Hennessy, she is also moe. Therefore, it'd be pretty easy to dismiss Chiaki as the "this is your crush, feel emotions for the perfect gamer girl" character, because she is. But in her case, I think it works due to the reveal at the end of Chapter 5 that no, she's a bit too perfect to be a real person because she isn't one. Chiaki is part of the simulation. And what makes that kind of heartbreaking in retrospect is that occasionally she'll have these moments where she breaks out of that role and behaves like an actual socially inept weirdo, which makes her 10 times more charming. The bit in Chapter 3 where she just eats something off the ground to figure out what it is and then spits it out, that's great, that's adorable. The part where she gets distracted for a moment inside the second investigation because she wants the other girls to tell her what it's like to be characters inside a video game, there's at least 3 layers to that. In the end, Chiaki Nanami is more of an ideal than a character, but we cannot help but love her all the same, because being the lovable girl is what she is. Yeah, there's my guy right there. Yasuhiro fucking Hagakure. For all the smart characters with nuanced motives, every series has to have at least one worthless fucking shit for brains, and Hiro is the absolute king. He's kind of like chicken salt. Even though he may not always be an essential ingredient, if you put him on top, it just makes everything taste better. The fact that Hiro got let into Hope's Peak is one of the things that tips you off kind of early that Hope's Peak is kind of a bullshit concept even in universe, putting all questions of his supernatural abilities and his talent for running scams aside. I also think Yasuhiro Hagakure has fancy lad handwriting is one of the funniest, oh yeah, this is going to be a clue, isn't it, moments in the entire series. Honestly, he should be in every game, not just Danganronpa ones. Makoto is a big bowl of vanilla ice cream compared to Hajime's just plain ice. He is the everyman protagonist taken to its logical conclusion, an affable Zeppo Marx type figure who doesn't so much move through life, so much as stuff just keeps happening to him. He gets along with everyone due to a combination of blind optimism and being so unobjectionably average compared to the other freaks and weirdos. I feel like he's almost too saccharine at times, but that's deliberate, and he also shares a name with my favourite Street Fighter character, so I'll give him a couple of extra points for that. Sayaka is a lovable girl placed in a bad situation, wherein she made some really bad mistakes and paid too high a price. In a single chapter, she manages to make a very strong impression, give you a rounded picture of who she is, and in her death, tells one of the most complete stories in the entire series, starting the rest of the franchise off strong from the get-go. Sayaka was frightened out of her wits, desperate to escape, and put together a hasty little scheme to get out and find out what happened to her teammates, not knowing of course that if she succeeded, it would also have resulted in the deaths of all of her classmates. It was a stupid thing to do, and I'm in no way justifying it, but she's a teenager in a stressful, high-stakes, emotionally charged situation. Her craftiness and perception is made clear early on, and while there's ambiguity as to how much of her behaviour towards Makoto was driven by manipulative intent, I personally choose to believe that it was at least somewhat earnest. I don't know, just look at how scared she is here. She just got in over her head and didn't really think through the full repercussions of what she was doing, and I mean, just look at this. That's just fucking heartbreaking, you know? One of the things the series repeatedly hammers home is that under the right circumstances, like a magic disease that turns you evil, even the kindest of people can be pushed to the point of murder. In short, don't hate the player, hate the game. And then there's this cunt. Sometimes you need a character who's just a complete rotter, and Kokichi certainly fits the bill. He's narcissistic, cruel, and all his actions ever result in are more problems, pain, murder, suicide, and, occasionally, entertainment for the audience. This one's going to be a bit longer than usual, so please bear with me. Consider making yourself a cup of Milo. Kokichi's design is adequate but unspectacular, and there seems to be a lot of deliberate ambiguity and contradiction around his character, which makes assessing him somewhat difficult on a surface level. He has a couple of good gags early on, but these gradually wear thin to the point where you're already tired of him by the time his behaviour becomes openly hostile and despicable. But he's not meant to be likeable, with neither Kaede nor Shuichi expressing any positive sentiment towards him during his free time events, a trait no other non-Ursine character in the game shares. Likewise, his talent is nominally being the ultimate supreme leader, even though he displays less leadership under any standard definition than Kaede, Shuichi, Kaito, Angie, Kurumi, and maybe Maki. But then they do this thing at the end of Chapter 5, where they suggest you go back through the game and re-examine his actions to see if he was really so bad after all, or maybe it's a little bit misunderstood. And then when you do, and this is the really interesting part, it turns out he's an even more loathsome piece of shit than you originally thought. This becomes ever more unambiguous with each subsequent playthrough. Now, don't get me wrong, Kokichi does want to end the killing game and win by beating the mastermind, but a large part of what motivates him in this is his desire to be seen as smarter than everyone else and beat the mastermind to prove it without any real regard for his fellow students. Sadly, he's never quite smart enough to do this, only ever furthering the mastermind's goals and making it easier for them. Here's putty in the palm of Smugi's hands. The trick to understanding Kokichi is that the crux of his character, and single most consistent trait, isn't so much that he is a liar as it is that he's a bully, a lens through which all of his actions make total sense. He's bullying Kibo the first time we meet him, and he never really lets up after that, only expanding his range of targets. I'm not going to go too deep in this because I'm assuming you've all been bullied at some point in your life, and therefore understand the basic trimodal bullying structure on at least some kind of intrinsic level, so instead, let's do a brief recap of Kokichi's greatest hits, starting from Chapter 2. Here he ropes Gonta into a scheme to cause chaos, making someone else seem complicit in the harm caused, even though nobody else really buys it. Through this, he's able to subject everyone to bug torture, where, among other things, Himiko is buried alive in insects. In all fairness to him though, Chapter 2's daily life also does contain one of the only examples of someone actually finding anything he does amusing, with Korekyo, who is a creepy serial killer, expressing admiration of how he manipulates Kaito during the optional casino event. And speaking of Kaito, let's move on to the Chapter 2 trial, which is where Kokichi really comes into his own. Here he controls the flow of the argument using an internet-style, logically therefore, debate strategy, even though his logic is usually highly flawed and he's wrong most of the time. He also cleverly accuses pretty much everyone scattershot style, so he can look back and say, yeah, I knew that all along, regardless of who the eventual culprit is. We can see both of these in action as he uses said fallacious logic, and the evidence he stole to pit Maki against Kaito, railroading things until the latter calls him out on his bullshit. Kokichi is better at making arguments than almost everyone else, but as we see here, this doesn't mean he's right. Kaito is terrible at arguing, but he has a keen degree of emotional insight, and his hunches based on this and trying to understand other people are almost always right on the money. Most of the usable evidence he does provide in debates is either dragged out of him when called out by Shuichi, or stuff he's deliberately been concealing from everyone else, like the evidence that backs up Maki's testimony about her nighttime meeting with Ryoma. This last piece of evidence means the whole preceding rigmarole was a complete waste of time, mostly done for his own amusement and cruelty. We can also see here his habit of chucking a wobbly whenever someone other than him lies, which people usually actually buy because he's built himself a justifiable reputation of not being worth listening to. When Kurumi is eventually revealed to be the culprit, he really rubs it in, because he really likes to see people squirm, and when she calls him the most despicable cretin she's ever met, I think we all kind of felt that. It's also revealed that he knew about the contents of Ryoma's motive video and still encouraged him to pursue it, the first of several states of suicide he's complicit in at least encouraging to some degree. He then reveals Maki's identity as the ultimate assassin in a crowded setting where she can only respond by picking him up by the throat and threatening him ineffectively. This is classic bully behavior of the type he engages in several times throughout the story. Provoke, 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 victim lashes out, act like you're the one being picked on and they're the aggressor, witnesses are inclined to be sympathetic towards you, and engage in the it doesn't matter who started it fallacy of equal culpability. It's not unreasonable that people would want to know that she's an assassin, of course, but this still makes her arguably less of a threat than him, given that she's mostly been reasonable and kept to herself, while he constantly causes chaos for malicious purposes, and is also nominally the leader of an evil organization, which is, of course, far worse than being an assassin. This attempt to ostracize her ultimately proves fruitless, thanks to the efforts of Kaito, who is a good boy, and continuously able to stand up to Kokichi by not playing his dumb games and also punching him in the face at one point. The rest of Chapter 3 is mostly business as usual on Kokichi's part, apart from the moments in the trial and aftermath where he advises Himiko on emotions and stuff. These are notable as some of the only moments where he shows a shred of human decency, but this advice, of course, runs contrary to most of his actions throughout the rest of the game, so let's move on. In Chapter 4, he learns the alleged truth of the outside world and uses it to his advantage in what is, to me, probably his most intelligent set of moves throughout the game. At this stage, there are two characters still willing to work individually with him in Mew and Gonta. Oh, and there's also the mastermind who he eagerly collaborates with to force this scenario. By controlling the flow of information he has exclusive access to, he's able to convince Gonta to kill Mew thanks to the situation he's willingly engendered. Of course, he could have just provided that information to Mew, which would completely negate her motive to escape, or prevented her scheme in many other ways, but that would have resulted in 0 deaths instead of the 2 he wanted. This way, he's able to clear out two of the biggest obstacles standing in his way, as well as the closest thing he had to remaining friends. Gonta's inadvertent memory loss, however, creates a scenario in the fourth trial wherein both Kokichi and Kaito are wrong, as Gonta isn't lying about not knowing anything about killing Mew, even though he is guilty. Gonta is neither the first nor last death or act of suicide Kokichi is complicit in, but it's the only one he seems to give a shit about, however briefly, because that blood is almost solely on his hands. He gets over it pretty quickly though, and brushes it off so he can beat up Kaito. Kaito's illness means he can no longer stand up to Kokichi, who can now effectively deploy Vance against him and bully yet another person to further raise his self-esteem. Shuichi, tired of Kokichi constantly creeping on him, then proceeds to effectively call him out as being an unlovable asshole. Kokichi pretends like everything's beneath him again, and walks off to further laugh about Gonta's funny death when he's alone. I'm not going to go too deep into chapter 5 because I'm sure it's already been picked clean by other people. I realise this has already gone on way too long, and I also want to talk about characters whose presence I actually enjoy. Basically what happens is he pretends to be the mastermind to drive everyone to despondency, stop them trying to escape, or do anything about their situation. As evidence, he takes control of the Exosols to beat a dying man unconscious and use him as a hostage. His plan here essentially amounts to ending the killing game by indefinitely continuing it, making it boring to watch by creating a new and exciting scenario nobody's ever seen before, exposing the mastermind by providing cover for them and making it so the others stop trying to discover who it is, and doing their job for them so they don't have to. Now, what's interesting about this is that it actually falls down to the mastermind at one point to intervene and save everyone by placing a flashback light before Himiko's assisted suicide by way of Maki. If they hadn't done that, then that also would have ended Kokichi's plan right there, but they wanted a more dramatic murder and or suicide, and Kokichi was, as always, more than willing to provide. Then whatever he was planning completely falls apart because Maki goes rogue and hits him with a well-deserved poison crossbow bolt, trying to end the game by killing the mastermind just like Kaede did. His backup plan is to drag everyone else down with him by creating a class trial where even Monokuma doesn't know the answer. This is cool, but also does nothing to end the killing game unless they pick wrong, wherein everyone dies because Kaito is already terminal. This is, of course, worse than a regular class trial, because in one of those, the worst case scenario is that at least one person survives. Oh, and maybe the mastermind, who you've done a real solid favor for here. You don't win at chess when you throw a tantrum and knock over the chessboard. That's what we call losing. Once the trial ends, we go over Kokichi's final monologue as narrated by Kaito, and the question is asked as to whether he was misunderstood all along. Kaito, the only one who was there, and whose keen emotional insight has saved everyone on multiple occasions, says, who knows? And here's the thing. Does it really matter? Finally, in chapter 6, you go into his room and find that he was concealing evidence from everyone that could have helped uncover the mastermind and end the killing game. You also find that he was once the leader of a small band of petty crooks with a non-violent modus operandi that he clearly didn't care too much about once he was freed from those obligations and given the chance to let loose. Whether he was a halfway decent person at any point in the past is, of course, irrelevant. In the words of Monokuma, that was the you before you became who you are now. If you harm people but privately felt really bad about it, or thought it would be for their own good, then that does nothing to negate said harm, or obligate your victims towards lenience. It's heavily implied that Kokichi knew the killing game was being broadcast in some capacity, and maybe with his dying words, he wanted to plead his sympathy not to the other characters who had already given up on him, but the live audience, and in an metafictional sense, us. Alas, it is to no avail. Alone, unloved, and in pain, his dying attempt to convince everyone that the abuse he committed was actually for his victims' own good is ultimately futile. At the end of the game, he asks if he wasn't boring. My answer? Yeah, some of the time, but Ryoma, he had a cool leather jacket. As a rule, I'm very hesitant when it comes to saying characters are coded as having certain traits, but with that in mind, come on. I don't like to speculate, but it's pretty obvious there's something up with Himiko. I love this goofy little weirdo. Can't get enough of her. She's endearingly awkward and pretty much tuned out of everything happening around her on a social level. And the fact that she's there means we get to spend a third of a trial collectively bullying a child into admitting magic isn't real, which is very entertaining. There are dozens of really funny Himiko momos that can slip under the radar, only some of which are based around her laziness, monotonous inability to read a mood, or difficulties understanding what is and isn't appropriate to say. Like her being rude to Kibo because she considers him more of an appliance, or how she gets really invested in the Monocubs' weird little incestuous sitcom during Chapter 4. I've no idea what this really means, as I've not read them, nor have I any desire to, all my knowledge having come from cultural osmosis and funny YouTube videos that my best friend sends me, but the vibe I get is that she would be really into the warrior cats, especially given her weird little love hotel furry fantasy. Also, speaking of which, look up the warrior cat saddest deaths on YouTube. The videos you find there will be funnier than anything I can make on purpose. But on a more serious level, we get to see Himiko suffer emotionally more than pretty much any other character in the entire franchise. The part in the third trial where she basically just gives up and shuts down is, to me, one of the most emotionally real moments in Danganronpa. Sometimes you just can't handle it anymore and you just want to lie down and go to sleep forever. You have to struggle to keep your eyes open and not just give up. It's hard and it takes strength to come back from that, and through her friends, Himiko gets through it and learns to be strong. The journey she goes on to learn from those she's lost and grow up in her own odd little way is very powerful. I haven't not felt that tiredness in years. Sakura is so fucking awesome, writing to fighting. Just look at that, that is peak character design right there. They completely knocked it out of the park. She's just incredibly fucking cool. Sakura makes a very strong impression during the main game. Her free time events are also fantastic. I cried a little bit during Chapter 4. When they read the note, I was just... Oh! God, she's so fucking cool! The fact that this dork isn't the most obnoxious character of all time, despite sharing all of said hypothetical character's odious traits, is a minor miracle. When the other characters cringe at him, we cringe too, but we also laugh and let him into our hearts. The point after which he's found guilty, where to preserve his pride, he explains what actually happened and describes his cartoon battle fantasy, is surprisingly one of the most poignant moments in the entire franchise. Angie is, bobblyhead aside, one of the most fascinating characters in the entire Danganronpa franchise. Her religion and upbeat personality can initially lead both other characters and the players themselves to overlook how sharp and analytical she is, something that begins right at the start of Chapter 1, where she instantly narrows in on the game will continue until only 2 students remain rule, and questions its purpose. In Chapter 2, you can see her begin to put the pieces of her plan in place when she converts Himiko to her religion, as well as demonstrating some early suspicion with regards to the flashback light. You can also see here how she's one of the few characters in the entire franchise, along with Nagito and Kokichi, who repeatedly makes use of Monokuma and the Monocubs' roles as game facilitators by just asking them for help whenever she needs something done. Then in Chapter 3, she suddenly takes control of the game and instantly becomes the most powerful player through a combination of coalition building and social intelligence. And in an interesting change of dynamics, suddenly you and your friends are the ones on the outside. Although she plays an antagonistic role, none of her scheming is done with malicious or harmful intent. She sees what she's doing as benevolent. Angie wants to save her friends' lives and end the killing game the only way she knows how, no matter the cost. She's being pragmatic. I'm not going to write a whole essay on her for this video, but here are just a few short questions for you to consider related to the game's themes of truth versus lies when starting your own analysis. It's indicated that Angie really does believe that God is speaking through her. With this in mind, does it really count as manipulation if she earnestly buys into what she's selling? If Angie didn't believe, then would it matter in a practical sense? Is the student council's participation in religion necessarily a bad thing if it provides them with comfort and saves lives through helping form a united front? These are all moot points, of course, because she was right all along and they should have listened to her. From a religious perspective, I believe the correct way to examine Angie is not so much through the lens of Abrahamic or Polynesian religions, which is what I assume most Western players' minds would instantly jump to, but more as a satire of Japanese new religions. Not so much the whole ballad of Omen Shoko, but more groups like the Irrepressible Happy Science, or smaller groups like those guys who kidnapped that one seal. Also, if you do her free time events, she says she uses the dark web to buy human organs, which I think is pretty interesting. Look at her little bobbly head. Look at this little femboy. Am I allowed to use that word? Look at how short this little guy is. Where'd he go to middle school? Redwall? He's 3 apples tall. He lives in a mouse hole and sleeps in a sardine tin. He has shrimp-coated traits. He somehow manages to be shorter than Ryoma, even though Ryoma's half a meter shorter than him when measured by height. I'm not picking on him because he's the size of an atom, I'm doing it because he has all of the negative traits, which by pure coincidence are associated with people measured in grams. The character development he undergoes in Chapter 3 also seems a little bit cut short. It is satisfying to see him turn over a new leaf, much like the ones he shelters under to escape raindrops, but also just kind of occurs and is finished with almost instantly once he leaves the hospital, with him saying, "Oh shucks guys, I really learned my lesson once Peko died. Sorry for acting like a jerk." Speaking of which, like I detailed in Peko's entry, I think it's very reductive to only focus on the two of them as they relate to each other. As with her, the way sorry about this. Hold on a second. Fuck! My sincerest apologies. I forgot Peko. Let's rewind. Yeah, she should be around here. Let's just wait for this one to end. Yes, you could almost say I am attracted to women. Oh ho ho ho. She actually stands out as being very emotionally mature and comfortable with who she is in a relative sense. And of her classmates, she might actually be the one closest to achieving self-actualization. Because of this, she spends a lot of her free time events trying to bring Hajime out of his shell and help him with his problems as she sees them, rather than the other way around. They read more like Ibuki's free time events with Hajime rather than Hajime's free time events with Ibuki. Pitchfork.com, 7.9 out of 10. Peko is a fine character, and, like I'll go into more detail with in Fuyuhiko's entry, reducing the two of them down to their relationship with each other does a huge disservice to both. Her free time events are very nice, and I think compared to some of the other students, hers do a good job at really showing the baby steps she's been taking to open up and overcome what she's been trained to be. The progress she shows is as reserved as she is, which makes it all the more meaningful when it leads to her learning how to smile. This bit is also really funny. She plays her part in the second trial very well, and her trying to improv being Sparkling Justice is hilarious in retrospect, because from what we know of Peko, she's probably freaking the fuck out under the mask trying to do the voice. Getting deliberately found guilty and aiming for Fuyuhiko to win via a legal technicality was never going to work, but it was nevertheless a very ballsy move on her part that I appreciate a lot. Trying to sway Monokuma with a philosophical argument like that is the closest the games have ever come to feeling like an actual trial, and it felt very fresh. I don't actually have a lot to say about him. When I went back to Danganronpa 2 after a few years' absence, my first thought upon seeing her was, great, now I have to deal with Hyoko again. But I kept an open mind, and soon enough I discovered that nope, I was completely wrong. Hyoko is fantastic from start to finish, and I wouldn't change a single thing about her. Right off the bat, amazing character design, the perfect synthesis between her talent and personality. Her kimono is gorgeous, and I adore how expressive she is with the sleeves, as is appropriate for a traditional dancer. I also like how she has at least 5 completely different sprites for 5 completely different variations of Rascal. I think the term gremlin is very overused these days, and often misapplied to characters who are actually imps, goblins, or possibly weasels, but she is definitely a genuine gremlin. Hyoko is constantly being unnecessarily cruel, making snide comments and trying to bully everyone, even though everyone apart from Mikan and Kazuichi ignore her, and it's so fucking funny.
Too bad you're so stupid and boring and unpopular. Your life is meaningless.
She's such a bitch, oh my god.
Did you know asbestos is yummy too? You should try some later.
Every time she just tears into Mikan or Kazuichi, I'm like, yes, fuck him up, Hyoko. Rack him! Yeah!
If it's only a little, then keep your mouth shut. Your ugly face is stressing me out. It makes me want to puke.
Hyoko, you're so bad. Oh my god. She's so funny. A good Hiyoko trait is how, whenever she tries to be earnest, kind, or exhibit genuine distress in a group setting, it always comes off identically to when she's acting maliciously or faking it. This extends to the point of her genuinely trying to build a nice tribute to her dead friends, only to end up erecting a horrifying satanic altar pulsing with evil energy. Hiyoko's free time event backstory goes a long way in explaining her actions, not only with regards to why she's so hilariously mean to everyone, but also a lot of her more serious traits. Note that once Byakuya gets the old stick and poke, she's the first one to understand exactly what sort of situation they're in and drag everyone back down to earth, because yeah, this is what happens, you'll have to deal with it. Her and Byakuya's backstories actually share a lot of similarities, and if Byakuya weren't in the game and there wasn't also another second Byakuya in the game, she would definitely be the Byakuya of the game. She's strongly dedicated towards preserving and maintaining traditional Japanese art and culture, which makes sense given that her relatively small field is one which often relies upon centuries-old knowledge being passed down on an individual person-to-person level throughout the generations. There isn't nearly enough research on Nihon Buyo translated into English as I'd like, but if you want to read a good book about it, then I'd recommend this one. Of course, you find this out in a conversation where it also turns out she's a nationalist xenophobe, which definitely tracks with everything else about her. A tragic, Cassandra-like figure, Hiyoko's death is one of the most apropos in the entire series. She constantly warns everyone against blind trust and relying on others, despite, or possibly because, of her own general helplessness. Then, when she disregards her own better instincts, lets her guard down and decides to follow someone else's helpful advice, her predictions come true, and she dies the meaningless death she always feared. Hiyoko died because she was trying to grow as a person, which is why, out of all of her classmates, they choose to show you a tantalizing glimpse of who she could have grown up to be. As is, all we're left with are fond memories and tiny footprints in the sand. Ants crushed underneath. Byakuya is a fantastic rival, both as an antagonistic force, separate from Monokuma, and just as a complete smug fucking wanker. You just love to hate the guy. He starts the game acting like a huge dick, and continually escalates his total bastardry up until he learns his lesson, and is now maybe 10% less of a Tory boy shithead. This is reasonable progress that feels more natural to me than a quick, Pekko's dead, I guess I'm a good guy now, attitudinal switcheroo like Fuyuhiko gets. You just love to hate the guy. And when he's outsmarted and has to eat shit in the Chapter 4 trial, it is immensely satisfying. You just love to hate the guy. Also, as a fun little factoid that has zero effect on his ranking, not that he needs any help, you just love to hate the guy. If we were to count the various light novel spin-offs, then Byakuya is the only Danganronpa character we can confirm has read Zizek. Kaito is at number 8. Kyoko's pretty much the main character of Danganronpa 1, the Sherlock Holmes to our Dr. Watson, hand-holding and passing notes to you throughout the game to act as a mouthpiece for the things she's already figured out. You gradually open up to each other while you try and figure out what the heck's going on, until the events of Chapter 5 place you against each other in a trial, and she fucks you over. But it all turns out okay. Then some more stuff happens, you find out she's actually the ultimate detective and get to see her facade crack here, and ooh, that's powerful. And then the game ends. It may seem like I've skipped a lot of stuff there, because I have. Because you already understand Kyoko and why she's great. I should probably trust you more with stuff like that. Much like Kyoko, learn to have more trust in Makoto, or whatever. And I think we've all learned an important lesson. I don't want to be fucking sad and making videos, I just make jokes and shit. Why don't I be so soft and stuff about Haruchani death, you know what I mean? Kaide is a lovable breath of fresh air after the first two mainline protagonists, and takes a much more proactive role as group leader. She's an extroverted hard worker with sweater-vest energy, and can be somewhat bossy and oblivious to other people's feelings and boundaries, struggling emotionally when things don't go her way despite her good intentions and love of motivational team-building exercises. And she's a girl. But she's not the main protagonist, because Kaede Akamatsu is a murderer. Or effectively a murderer anyway. It doesn't matter that she wasn't technically the one who killed Rantaro, it was her decision to roll that shot put ball, putting all questions of predestination on Tsumugi and the writers' part aside. Like all the others, she was placed in a fundamentally unfair situation, made a bad decision and paid too high a price. If she lived, she could have been the best protagonist in the series, but she didn't. As is, she managed to ingrain herself on our hearts throughout the brief time we got to know her. She deserved so much better, but then again, they all kind of did. One of the things the series repeatedly hammers home is that what you deserve, in any kind of moral sense or narrative framework you choose to process the world through, has nothing to do with a killing game. It's just kill or be killed. When I think about Kaede, I get this thing called an emotion, and I don't get those very often anymore. I hope she's in a better place now. Anyway.
Can I play the piano anymore?
Of course you can.
Well, I couldn't before.
Holy dooly, this bloke's a bit of a kooky customer. Crikey, what can you even say about this bloody drongo that hasn't been said already? Well, no walkers, big knockers. Because I'll tell you. Firstly, Nagito is the Danganronpa equivalent of Revolver Ocelot, in that he found his evil dead crusher's body on the ground and cut off the hand without washing it to replace his real hand, probably so he can jerk off, because that makes it feel like someone else's hand is doing it, which technically it is. However, this turns out to be a bad idea because it's seemingly a magic hand and there's still evil contained within it. The character designers did a good job of getting across that he's the guy to do this sort of thing by making him look really musty. And thirdly, because I completely forgot that I have a date in half an hour, and therefore don't have enough time to really dig into how the games repudiate his disgusting ideology and worldview, his English voice sounds like Link from the Zelda CDI games.
Gee,
Hajime.
it sure is boring around here.
Nagito? What happened to you?
I just wonder what Ganon's up to.
Kaede's death leaves the role of protagonist to Shuichi, and somehow, despite all odds, he was able to fill the void in our hearts she left behind. As the ultimate detective, he already has the skills necessary to conduct an investigation from the get-go, but he's unable to fully apply them and engage in a full prosecution without overcoming the emotional scars of the past and developing more confidence with the support of his friends. And this development is handled masterfully. As you've no doubt noticed via a process of elimination, the top of this list is, and will continue to be, very V3 heavy. And I think one of the many reasons for this is that V3's core cast feel much more intertwined than those of the other two games, in addition to being strongly written as individuals. And with a few confidence boosters from Kaito to get him started, it's Shuichi who binds them all together. It's thanks to these friends and the interplay between them that he quickly grows into the role Kaede entrusted him with, honouring her memory by easily exceeding the legacy of their other, much more dull predecessors. The part in Chapter 6 where he easily shreds through both Tsumugi and the Monokubs' excuses and defences, and then he does it again to the entirety of Danganronpa, and then he inspires Himiko and Maki to join him in burning the entire franchise down around them, using the words imparted to him by both Kaito and Kaede. That is fucking wizard, that is. On the surface, it would seem obvious to anyone with a functioning brain that both creativity and critique alike can never be objective. Compelling art cannot be created, nor can it be assessed through any quantitative formula alone. Or can it? Let's do some quick maths. It's an oft-repeated maxim that flawed characters equals good writing. Ipso facto, more flaws equals a better character. Does only flaws therefore equal a perfect character? One would assume not, but here's the thing. It worked. Just look at her. My horrible, horrible child. They had to build a second heaven above the first one because it wasn't good enough for you and none of the other angels could tolerate your presence. Her inventions may not have changed the world, but as long as we keep her memory in our minds and hearts, then we still can. Because I believe fiction can change reality. All you have to do is not be as constantly obnoxious as her, and make the opposite of whatever decision or statement you think she would make at any given moment in your personal life. Rest in peace, you pathetic, horny idiot. You were young, dumb, and full of bright ideas. I miss you. Monokuma isn't so much a Danganronpa character as he is Danganronpa itself. His presence effectively constitutes the killing game and sets the tone for everything it entails from humour to heartbreak. I'd go so far as to say that without Monokuma, Danganronpa simply wouldn't work, or at least not nearly as well as it has, and it's thanks to him that the franchise is the success it is today. Monokuma more than deserves his iconic status, and there's really not that much more to add. Yes, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Monokuma is paramount to the series' success. And speaking of paramount... What's that? We're not doing this again? Never mind that, let's see who's at number 1. Maki is the best character in Danganronpa. I realise that this might be somewhat of an obvious choice. As I mentioned earlier, I haven't actually had a look at anyone else's rankings. But sometimes we must admit to ourselves that there is no trick question, no flippant joke response to fall back on, and the obvious answer is actually the correct one. There comes a time when every one of us must embrace sincerity, even if you fear it will be read as performative. For some kind of holistic reason I've been struggling to articulate for weeks, it seems almost antithetical to the disposition required to put Maki as the number 1 character, to then subsequently write a long essay about why this is so. It seems somehow contradictory, and I've never really been the wordiest compared to everyone else I know, so I'll try and keep this as concise as is humanly possible. We hold this truth to be self-evident. When I first met Maki, I didn't expect she'd turn out to be the best character in the entire series, as is so often the way. This was despite her cool design and even colder demeanour. Actually, scratch the temperature-based adjectives, her design is an instant classic. Slightly understated apart from the big hair, which pays off wonderfully during Chapter 5 when she loses control and starts to spike herself up like an angry cat. She also does that thing with her mouth. I thought that Maki was interesting, but also possibly just some kind of red Kyoko, because they do share some superficial similarities. Similarity number 1, they're both girls. Similarity number 2, they're characters in Danganronpa. Kyoko is a fabulous character, of course, but we already have one of her. And if you mix the red Kyoko with the white Maki, all you're going to get is the minty taste of a candy cane. However, once Maki's secret identity as an assassin is revealed, we find out that underneath her cold, furtive exterior, she's actually an angry, awkward, impulsive, unstable jerk who's nothing like Kyoko. Maki has a bucket load of flaws, she's downright mean sometimes, and it's great. Maki, the young curmudgeon, is a very funny character. At some points, she well captures a certain specific feeling and archetype that I always find very entertaining, even when it isn't done quite as well as it is here. She is the grouchy, antisocial teenager, trying just a bit too hard to act like a cool and badass lone wolf, irrespective of whether she actually is or not. This is all subtle but entirely deliberate. She keeps trying to do her cool catchphrase, which doesn't quite work for most of the game, and is more endearingly awkward than anything else. She makes some pretty good jokes and little riffs on what's going on, but nobody laughs at them because she's really bad at delivering them, and it comes off as her just aggressively threatening to kill Shuichi, which is funny in and of itself. He can't read her mood, she can't land the tone. It's no coincidence that there are multiple flashbacks where Maki is trying to have her tragic backstory, which is very sad, Maki, only to be annoyingly interrupted by people thinking she's cool and wanting to hang out with her. Despite everything, Maki is begrudgingly forced to become friends with Shuichi and the others through the efforts of Kaito, because Kaito saw she was in danger of becoming the outcast she had already resigned herself to being, and felt she was in need of a helping hand whether she wanted it or not. Kaito also has the mind of a child, and kids just like Maki for no real reason as she sees it. This is consistent. There's a lot more funny stuff to her than that, of course, and she's always just mean enough when she's teasing Shuichi. Also, as Shuichi says when she works with him during the Chapter 3 investigation, she's refreshingly direct when it comes to dealing with everyone else's bullshit. Like when she tells Kyo to shut the fuck up about his seances, when someone has been murdered and there is a time limit on the investigation. When I read that, I was like, yes, thank you! Because he totally had that coming even if he wasn't the obvious murderer. And speaking of killers, another thing I find interesting about her is how even though she clearly has a lot of unprocessed guilt and PTSD over things she was forced to do and go through as an assassin, she's not necessarily opposed to the act of killing itself due to said upbringing. This gives her a uniquely killing in neutral ethos. A superb little moment of black comedy results from this in Chapter 5, when everyone's reached their lowest point, and Himiko, in her desperation, asks Maki to kill her. And Maki's response to this? Yeah, sure, I can do that. Just hang on, buddy. Let me just check this flashback light, answer this email, and I'll get right back to you. I'll snap your little neck. I've got you covered. Then when Shuichi tries to get Maki to agree not to kill Kokichi, she's like, yeah, about that. I'm just gonna walk off now. I'll talk to you later. Also, regarding that fucker, another fun trait of hers is the way she keeps choking him out one-handed, giving us fun ASMR noises. It's really funny, like how Homer used to choke out Bart back in the 90s before techniques got better, and Homer was forced to transition to a more orthodox MMA-style ground and pound. But enough about funny Maki, let's stick to Chapter 5 and talk about the ways in which she makes us feel other emotions. Maki's at her worst, best, and most complex during V3 Chapter 5, her flaws really coming to the forefront, as she somewhat recklessly decides to go rogue, kill Kokichi, and maybe torture some information out of him first. She does this because, in the mindset she's been raised to follow, this is the correct thing to do in that situation, easily justifiable, and downright sensible considering everything that's happened thus far. Like Kaede, she tries to kill the mastermind to end the killing game, except more directly and with far more evidence that Kokichi is the mastermind. Then Kaito steps in the way, everything falls to shit, and she starts panicking. Kaito doesn't want her to be the killer she used to be anymore, and maybe she doesn't either, but, and I like this, she's relapsed. This is far more interesting than the usual, "Oh shucks you guys, I've really learned my lesson and changed now," that you would expect because progress isn't a one-way street. She goes back to following her assassin's credo instead of the norms of her friends, which ties in with the fracturing relationship between Kaito and Shuichi that she was trying to hold together during the first half of the chapter. Her backup plan of ending the killing game by killing Kokichi when he appears during a trial, which would have been cool, also falls apart due to the culprit being inside the exisal. So, running out of options, she impulsively tries to pull an Aoi and kill everyone, including the mastermind, as one last big fuck you, because she feels otherwise Kaito's death would have been for nothing. She's fighting for revenge out of grief and not thinking rationally, which you can see as she slowly breaks down and gets more desperate throughout the first half of the trial. It is sad. Shuichi, however, is able to get through to her in the end by talking about Kaito and using the same empathetic techniques of reaching the truth by understanding others' perspectives that he helped teach him. And in the end, Maki shows enough courage to cop to what she did and take responsibility. The others, having learned from everything that's happened thus far and gone through a lot of the same things that drove her to this point, understand and forgive her for this. It's about empathy. She doesn't really get a chance to directly apologize, partly because everyone's too burnt out emotionally from Kaito's death once it turns out she didn't do it, but mostly because Kibo starts exploding things 5 minutes later. But it's not really necessary and already heavily implicit. Maki's sense of duty and responsibility, which you can also see in the aforementioned scenes where she feels she has to be the one to mend the Shuichi-Kaito friendship, is something that also comes up a lot in her backstory and free time events. It's a major theme. She doesn't necessarily want to take care of the children in the orphanage she was raised in, but she does because it's both the irresponsible thing to do and something she'll have to do anyway due to the system she's trapped within. It's a duty, just one she happens to be very good at, and there is some degree of emotional dedication there which the children can sense. This also extends to her killing people, which she also doesn't really have a choice in. It's horrible, but in her eyes, if she stops doing it, then they're just going to kill her and get some other kid to do it. She feels a sense of responsibility to make that sacrifice. Those people were going to die anyway, and she doesn't really have a lot of options to look forward to once she graduates. There's an important acknowledgement there that even if you're smart, talented, and have a lot to offer the world, sometimes you can't just decide to follow your dreams and do what's best for you as an individual because life doesn't work that way. It's always more complicated than that, it might not even be the right thing to do, and in Maki's case, she can't see a future for herself outside of the cards she's been dealt in life until you see little hints of it when you've become close enough to understand the difference between when she's offering to kill you as a favour and threatening to kill you as a joke. Also, the Japanese orphanage system is pretty messed up in general, by the way. From what research I've done and papers I've read on the topic, the way Japanese society is set up really stacks the deck against children without a solid family structure in place. And it's even worse if you don't have a family structure at all. The institutions they do have are often largely inadequate for providing anything close to a healthy upbringing, the resources just aren't there, abuse is rife, there's discrimination going on against the kids within the institutions, it's not great. The kids who age out of it very often aren't equipped to handle life outside the system either. There's a big drop-off in support, which leads to frequent homelessness, crime, it's a real messy situation all around. This has almost nothing to do with the Danganronpa series of video games, I just thought it was something more people should know about. It turns out societies have problems. At the end of the day, I think Maki's just a great character. She's got a cool design, she's funny, she's well written, her story was touching, her growth was satisfying, and everything about her just sort of clicks together perfectly. As I've mentioned before, what you earn and deserve really has nothing to do with the killing game. But when V3 ended, it sure was nice to see Maki looking out, after everything she'd overcome, towards something she never thought she'd have before. A brighter future with unknown possibilities. And there you have it. I believe that should just about settle all remaining arguments about the series from here on out. This was a 30-second joke about Popeye cartoons that somehow underwent enough scope creep to consume well over a year of my precious free time. Sadly, it is now 10 PM, which means it's time for all the Danganronpa characters to go to sleep. Good night, Gundam's hamsters. Good night, Ibuki. Good night, Toko, Hiyoko, and good night, Tsumugi. Good night, Nekomaru. Good night, Fuyuhiko. Good night, both Yasuhiros. And good night, Himiko. Good night, Hajime, Kaide, Shuichi, Makoto. Good night, spin-off characters. And good night, Kaito. Good night, Danganronpa. I've spent far too much time on this, learned nothing, and hope I don't have to say your name again for a good long while. So long. Bear well. Fuck this, I'm done, I'm fucking done, it's over.